It's a historic moment, particularly for our family. It's an exciting moment for me to finally find my brother so that we can take him home. And all of that has been made possible by the Zimbabwean authorities in collaboration with the South African government to make that process as painless as possible. There's been such a lot of amazing support given to us as a family.
Many of the neighboring states like Zimbabwe, Zambia, Tanzania, Angola and so on lent very concrete support to exiled South Africans by providing them with a refuge, providing them with support in the struggle against apartheid, and ensuring a safe environment where South Africans could continue to wage a struggle against apartheid from outside South Africa's borders.
And just speaking particularly about the February family, as we met with the younger brother, he said that it's for the first time that he's coming to the site. And for him, this is part of the healing process. So this particular process is very important from the healing point of view.
So I'm Kavita Lakha. I'm a forensic anthropologist. I work in the missing persons task team, conducting exhumations and forensic analysis of human remains.
Okay, I just wanted to know from the family's perspective, when you excavated for Basil's remains, what was the findings and the interpretation of the skeletal that you found? What condition was it in your interpretation?
So first of all, I'm a forensic anthropologist, so we are trained to deal with the human body, especially when it's in its skeletonized form.
Yeah.
So for me, the first thing I noticed is that it had a coffin. So I knew, okay, it had a coffin, I found nails, I found some handles, and that made me feel a bit more comfortable,
yeah,
because I knew what I was working within. And I was a bit concerned because the first thing I saw was the gravel. So it wasn't soil, it was really hard gravel. And the first thing that came to mind is preservation. So I'm not sure how much of it has survived, how much of the skeletal remains have survived because of the sediment.
Yeah.
But when I got in and I started cleaning, I started feeling a bit more comfortable when I started finding, like, there were arms, there were legs. And once you see arms and legs, like, people can still associate that with a person.
Yes.
So I started feeling a bit more comfortable and I was like, okay, we have something.
Yes.
But I think for me, when I found the skull, I was like, yes, the skull is there, it's intact. I can see that he had a post-mortem. So for me, the skull was intact. For me, the other thing was that I had to look at the orientation. Because, like, when we're working with the body, you'll say, okay, I have a head, and what we say is anatomical position,
okay,
which means like how you stand, your head, your shoulders, your arms. And I couldn't find anatomical position until I realized that the position was, he was on his belly.
All right.
So everything was the other way around.
Okay.
So it helps when you find the skull and you move your way down. So I was very happy with what we found, because in that kind of sediment it's very difficult to find remains.
Okay.
So I think it was successful all round for me.
Okay. So what made you determine that he had an autopsy?
So they
what indications were there?
they have this cut around the skull. It's a round cut, and it's an autopsy cut.
Oh, so,
It's
right.
clinical autopsy cut.
Why
so
would they normally do that?
to determine the cause of death.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's a routine.
Okay.
Most unnatural deaths get an autopsy, a post-mortem. So he had an
So
post-mortem.
when we had the news, he died of gunshot wounds. That would be obvious, the cause of death, wouldn't it? Would they still
So
perform an
that's
autopsy?
called a manner of death. A cause of death will be like the loss of blood due to shock or cardiac arrest. So I've learned that because of the field we're in.
Okay,
So
okay.
they still perform a cause of death. So they'll say multiple gunshot wounds. They'll tell you the entrance, exit. But the cause of death is actually going to be something like cardiac arrest or something related to trauma. Yeah.
My name's Madeleine Fullard. I used to work as a researcher for the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and now I'm the head of the Missing Persons Task Team in the National Prosecuting Authority of South Africa. Which falls under the Department of Justice.
Thank you. First of all, before we continue with this interview, I just want to say on behalf of the family, thank you for allowing us to document this entire process of the exhumation and identification, first of all, of Basil's grave, and for allowing us to step into your world of how you work and get close to that. It was a real privilege for us to be given that space. So I thank you on behalf of the family for that. The journey to identify Basil's grave, can you give us a bit of a background on that? I'm sure it wasn't an easy process.
Yeah, so, I mean, I had heard about Basil February back in the 1980s, and then again at the TRC, the Truth Commission. The family made a statement to the TRC, and there was a request as well for the recovery of his remains.
Correct.
And that's many years ago. That's 1996, 97. And when the Missing Persons Task Team began doing its work, we were mindful of the fact that there were dozens of MK cadres who had been killed in the Wankie and Sipholilo campaigns in 1967 and 1968.
Yes.
And every now and then a family would get in touch from that group, and we had nothing to offer them. We had nothing to even give hope. And over the years we began a process of researching the incidents, seeing what information was available, and we also became aware that there were articles written by former then Rhodesian Security Force members, and they referred to these online death certificates.
Right.
Yeah, so it became apparent that the death certificates from all the towns in Zimbabwe had been uploaded to the internet, and we were able to go through those, and we saw that there were a few death certificates which related to Wankie Sipholilo campaigns, including some of the Rhodesian security forces who were killed as well.
Right.
And there was one for Paul Peterson. And the fact that there was a death certificate, and it said on the certificate, intended place of burial, Bulawayo. Having done this work for a long time, it made us realize that at least his body entered the formal system of management of dead bodies.
Right.
Each country has got its own system, but it was likely that he went to a mortuary, and it's likely that he may have been buried in a municipal cemetery.
Yeah.
We also saw that there were death certificates for 2 what they called unidentified terrorists who were killed in the days after Basil February was killed. And they were also listed as to be buried in Bulawayo.
Right.
So we fortunately had contact with a group, an NGO in Bulawayo, who was working on the recovery of remains, and we requested them to go and have a look at the records, and they very kindly did that. And they came back and they blew our minds by saying, we've found the grave and we found the records.
I remember
And
you notifying me at the time.
And that was so overwhelming and exciting, and I realized then that there was a possibility that we can recover the remains.
Yes.
Of course, just having the records doesn't mean necessarily that what's in the ground corresponds, but it certainly seemed hopeful, and I think that then led to the process where we felt that the recovery of the remains could be joined to a larger process of recovering the remains of all of those who had died in exile.
Yeah.
Because families were dying off, parents were passing away, evidence and documents also disappear and so on. So there was time urgency as well. And the proposal that we embark on, what's called the Exile Repatriation Project, was accepted by Cabinet, and a policy was developed. And that led to the launch, and Basil February was part of that launch.
Yeah.
I think you're also aware that in February 2020, President Ramaphosa announced the intended repatriation of Duma Nokwe, Florence Maposho, and Basil February.
Yes.
And immediately the following month, COVID began, and that led to the whole process basically going nowhere for some time. And that's the period in which we developed the concept of country-to-country model of collective repatriations. And we excavated, I think, 48 people in the last 3 weeks.
Wow.
And in 2 different countries, 4 towns, 7 cemeteries.
So the 2 countries would have been?
Zambia and Zimbabwe.
In Zimbabwe. Right.
Yeah, so those 2 countries were served basically as the launch of the project.
Right.
Yeah, and we included the Wankisipulilo graves that we knew of in that program.
Right.
There are still many graves to be found for those particular cadres, but we haven't found them yet.
Okay, okay. Madeleine, so if I fast track on this,
Yeah.
Yesterday, we went to the cemetery.
Yeah.
And you kindly showed us the record.
Yeah.
First of all.
Yeah.
That was entered, and where Basil's burial record is kept. And then we walked to the grave. Like you said, you could be 98% sure, and we walked to the grave, and I remember you feeling pretty confident when we got to the spot that this is where he is buried. When that digging process started, how did you feel?
You know, it was the fulfillment of a dream in many ways for us. And for me particularly, having come from the Western Cape, and, you know, where the name of Basil February and his contribution, and, you know, it's extra special for people from the Western Cape. So it was a huge moment.
Yes.
I was not too worried about the possibility that it might not be the correct grave, because our assessment of the cemetery and its records was that the rows were intact, the grave numbering was intact,
Yeah.
and corresponded to the records. But you never know until you actually get down there and then you see what had happened. And we had just come from Lusaka, where we had experienced problems with a number of graves.
Yes, yes.
So that was quite, let me say, shattering, actually, because we knew that was going to be devastating for those families.
For the families, yeah.
But, you know, everything appeared consistent, and it's always a relief when you see the first trace of the remains. Yes, somebody is there, and we could see a little bit of the long bones, the leg bones, and so on. And so we were going to be able to recover something at least, because the other worry was that he could have basically, the soil is so acidic in southern Africa that the kind of disintegration of the remains happens quite fast.
Quite fast, yeah.
And we could have just ended with a situation where we just found dust in the shape of a skeleton.
Yeah.
You know, that has happened to us in the past.
Okay.
So it was a relief then when we saw, okay, we are going to recover something. And then I had actually stepped away from the grave. I can't remember what I was doing, if I was on the phone or something. And then I heard Claudia's voice going, Madeleine, Madeleine, come. And I knew something. I didn't know, maybe they'd found a bullet, maybe they'd, because a bullet would have also been a very useful indicator and what we call associated evidence that can assist with identification. So I came racing over, and they produced this little label. And that label read Paul Peterson, and you know, that is just, I said earlier, it's gold for us.
Yes.
It's gold, because I think we've only encountered that in South Africa very, very infrequently, very infrequently. And it's a little label that the undertakers put on top of the coffin. And it survives because it's made out of plastic, so it doesn't disintegrate or decompose. And it's there almost looking like it was placed yesterday. It's in perfect condition. So that just was absolutely, at that moment, I knew we were home free. It was, we had found the grave, and the sense of, you know, the import and the history and the emotional significance, and being there with members of the family. That's actually a huge privilege for us. A lot of our work is done outside of working with families. We'll be checking graves, checking, without anybody there. And it's so much more precious and intense and emotional when family members are actually present. But it also is a bit scarier, because if we don't find the remains, then you're sort of dealing with the fallout immediately. So at that point, then, you know, a sort of wave of, I've just felt, you know, that the kind of serenity, indescribable serenity.
Yes.
And I always use the peace that passeth all understanding, you know, because I can, the small worry in the back of my mind just lets go, and it's, we know we have him.
Yeah. I remember the moment I was at the graveside, and I was photographing when that name was found. And I could see the energy between the workers, and particularly between Claudia and
Kavita.
Kavita.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when Kavita gave Claudia the name,
Yeah.
how she caressed it,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and it was something special, yeah.
Very, very special. Yeah. Yeah. It's a rarity to find that. Yeah.
So then the remains are then all, I've noticed, are all put into carrier bags. And then eventually into a box, and it's wrapped into the South African flag. What happens then?
Okay, so we use the paper bags and the cardboard box, which are a little bit air permeable because
Right.
often the remains are a little bit damp from being in the soil for a long time, and it's best that they just dry naturally, you
Yeah.
know. So now the remains are being transferred to Harare, where they will join the other 15 individuals who were exhumed, the other deceased exiles
Yeah.
who were buried in Warren Hills Cemetery in Harare.
Right.
And those are held at an undertaker. And in a couple of days, a South African Defence Force plane will fly to both Lusaka and then to Harare. There will be a farewell ceremony in each country,
Right.
where the government of Zimbabwe sort of bids farewell to the remains. And it's a way of recognizing that shared history.
Yes.
That we're not just taking them away as if they were just, you know,
So
died
what-
while holidaying.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what will that involve? Our diplomatic mission?
Yes, the
and
South
so-
African Embassy is involved in organizing that
Right.
in Harare, and the embassy in Lusaka as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
And they'll have a little ceremony. I understand that the Zimbabwean president will actually attend
Okay. Right.
this farewell in Zimbabwe. I'm not sure about Zambia.
Right.
And there will be a delegation, perhaps the Minister of Arts and Culture will
Right.
participate in that. It won't be long, it'll just be a short thing, and then the remains will be, the boxed remains wrapped in flags will be placed on the Defence Force plane, and they'll be flown to Waterkloof
Waterkloof.
Air Base in Pretoria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is something that we're looking forward to, because as a family we were invited
Yes.
to welcome the remains
That's great,
back home,
yeah.
with the other families, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
You know, and that must be an absolutely wonderful occasion for you and your team, who have worked so hard and diligently to see the return of so many families,
Yeah.
loved ones, because that is a wonderful occasion
It is, and
for your team, but also for the country.
yeah. And there was a lot of pressure on us as the team to
I can
recover
imagine.
the remains. I mean,
Yes.
if we were to fail, then it might mean the end of this project as a
Yes.
whole.
Yes.
People would say, look, it's not possible, can't find the remains, and so on. So there was enormous pressure on us to successfully locate and recover the remains. And that day of the homecoming ceremony is just going to be a wonderful moment. And,
Yes.
you know, when the remains actually arrive back home as
Yeah.
citizens in the land of their birth,
Yes, indeed.
that they
indeed.
left in the early 1960s or 70s or 80s. And just imagine, for so
Yeah.
many years. Yeah.
Madeleine, you know, on behalf of our family, we want to thank you because, as I've indicated earlier to you, there were, over the years,
Yeah.
many a time when I wanted to give up because I just felt it will just never happen. But with your passion, with your professional integrity, you always spoke hope into me. And when you did that type of talk, it also transferred into the family. And I'm sure it happened with the other families as well.
Yeah.
So we thank you. Phew. To say thank you seems such an insignificant
No, and it's not even thanks.
word, but-
It's actually a huge privilege for us to be able to do this and to
Yeah, but
it's something we have dreamed
but
of
you see,
as well.
you don't see it. I see it from the outside with your persistence and your focus and the vision that you had. You know, drove this thing, and the results is now clear.
Yeah.
You know, and it touches not only our family, it touches many families, and it will have a significant ripple effect in the country. I believe, for instance, when we left the grave yesterday, that it already made news back home. And,
Really?
Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah.
For that.
It's a wonderful moment. I almost feel like I can die peacefully now myself. Don't plan to, but really, it's one of those momentous events that we just, it's extremely exciting. It was historic. It was
Indeed.
unprecedented, and at the level of the scale and the involvement of the families, bringing different groups of families to different towns and so on, and trying to make sure that they had, didn't feel like cattle being just flown back and forth and so on, but for it to be a meaningful experience.
Indeed. And for our family, it's a historic one. And what a wonderful occasion it was when you did your work on 2 or 3 occasions. You gave us, the family, the space to be alone with the grave. And that was absolutely gold for us. So thank you.
Yeah.